Welcome to today's program titled How to Maximize Value from Your Outside Counsel Relationships, Process Improvement, Innovation, and Data Analytics. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. However, you are encouraged to submit questions throughout the conference by typing them into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. For those interested in obtaining CLE credit, a code will be read later in the presentation. Please write this code down as it will not be reread and it is required on the CLE credit request form. During the program, you will see a slide with a QR code that you may scan to access and submit your request for CLE credit. You can also find a link to the form in the connection details email you recently received. Copies of the webinar recording and materials will be distributed to all attendees in the days ahead. This presentation has been prepared by Seyfarth for informational purposes only. The material discussed during this webinar should not be construed as legal advice or legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The content is intended for general information purposes only, and you are urged to consult a lawyer concerning your own situation and any legal or any specific legal questions you may have. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Stephanie Lambert. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Lambert. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer for NetScout Systems outside of Boston, and I'm here to welcome all of you to this webinar on behalf of the ACC's Northeast chapter. I'm pleased to see Seyfarth, who I've worked with on many occasions throughout my career on several different programs, to be tackling this really important issue. I love the title that we're going to learn how to maximize the value from our outside counsel relationships. This is a really important topic and one that affects all in-house counsel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn Soloway, who's with Seyfarth. Dawn?
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone who is joining. So my name is Dawn Soloway. I am a partner at Seyfarth Shaw in our Boston office. I am a member of our national trial team. I'm the co-chair of our national appellate team, and I am a founding member and co-chair of our Cultural Flashpoints Task Force. And I'm so thrilled to be co-presenting today with two other fantastic presenters. One is my colleague Mitch Weiss, who is a senior legal project manager here at Seyfarth. He works out of our Chicago flagship office. And Mitch and I work together every single day. He uses his project management experience to solve complex problems by effectively communicating and finding process improvements to satisfy and delight clients. So he's going to be sharing a lot of his wisdom today. And we are thrilled to have with us Kara Tampker, who serves as Associate General Counsel at IDC, which is a leading market intelligence and data company with operations in more than 50 countries. Kara currently manages corporate governance, intellectual property, and employment matters, providing her with practical insights into how to coordinate with specialized outside counsel across diverse practice areas. So thrilled to have Kara with us today. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief agenda of what we expect to cover today. We're going to talk about some of the questions and challenges that in-house counsel face, and then move into how to organize and make sense out of data, how to engage with technology solutions, how to use data-driven solutions, and then how to distill case insights and knowledge for practical and actionable use. So this will be a sort of conversational format between the three of us, and we very much invite you to submit your questions in the Q&A. We will try to keep an eye out for those and answer those as we go, or ideally we will have a couple minutes left over at the end to address questions. Next slide, please. So really what we want to sort of start with is to talk about questions to ask yourself if you are in-house counsel as to where your pain points are and where you might be able to better leverage your relationship with your outside counsel. Next slide. And one of those questions is, what kind of information are you receiving? And is that information genuinely useful? So, I know that often in-house counsel find that they are buried in emails, and that it can be very hard to find information that's buried in those emails. You may have Excel spreadsheets that are very dense with data, but hard to kind of pull back and see the big picture. You may have matter tracking that feels outdated because no one really has time to go in and update those spreadsheets. I know many of you receive client updates from various firms that are voluminous and that you may not have time to read, and legal updates from all over the country that just come in fast and furious, and it can be difficult to judge which ones actually affect your business. Next slide. Another question is whether outside counsel is providing support all the way to delivery. And what we mean by that is, if you're just getting an email or a memo that provides part of the answer, that may not really be sufficient. And what you might be looking for is someone who can support you all the way to the final product of what you need to deliver answers to your internal clients. Next slide. Also, does your outside counsel really understand your business priorities? So do they get the industry that you operate in? If outside counsel brings in a new team member, is that person read into your actual business? Next slide, please. And we were really interested to read this as we were preparing for this presentation. Next slide, please. We were very interested in seeing this this study that came through as we were preparing for this presentation. And so just invite you to try to guess, as you're sitting in the audience, what 1 in 4 in-house counsel cite as their top stressor. You may be surprised to hear that it's not billing, it's not budgets. Instead, on the next slide, we'll see that it is unrealistic expectations from top management. And so I think that may resonate with many of the people in the audience, that you have, of course, have your own internal stakeholders who have expectations of you. And ideally, your outside counsel is helping you, partnering with you, collaborating with you in order to meet those expectations from your top management. And so, Kara, could you sort of weigh in with your in-house counsel perspective as to sort of how these challenges, do these resonate with you? And are there other pain points that you think about when you think about leveraging outside counsel?
Yeah, no, I mean, this really resonates with me. And I saw the slides ahead of time, of course, but such an interesting idea that it's not complex litigation, it's not regulations, but unrealistic leadership expectations that are keeping us up at night. And I think a lot of that comes from legal departments being expected to operate more like a profit center, when our work should really be about risk mitigation. How do we quantify what we're doing? If I'm doing an HR training on disability accommodations, that value is going to be in the claims that don't get filed, in the investigations that don't materialize. But how do I explain that negative to my CEO and put that on a slide deck? And I think that's where that data question really comes in. The better we are at our job, sometimes the less visible our impact becomes. And it's not just proving that negative, right? It's having the right data that's going to tell the right story. So often we're looking at, what is the productivity of my team? And I may want to say, we touched 500 contracts last quarter. To me, that says we do a lot of work, right? To my sales leader, that says 500 deals got slowed down in legal last quarter. So, the evidence that I thought was showing a value creator, they're seeing as a bottleneck. So how do we get the right data that shows the value of the legal team? And how do we make it usable? How do I connect that data across silos? If I can't connect, for example, my HR data to my billing data to the number of complaints we receive, how can I show that the prevention programs we're working on are actually creating an impact? But if I could pull all that together and show that $5,000 investment in HR training led to a 20% reduction in complaints and $200,000 in avoided outside counsel fees, now I'm not a cost center, I'm a strategic partner. So when I think about the idea that, unrealistic expectations from leaders, I don't think it's actually unrealistic. I think it's just that as in-house legal leaders, we have to figure out how to leverage our data and our outside counsel relationships effectively to communicate how we're meeting those expectations.
I love that, and it's a perfect segue to what we're going to jump into next. Can we have the next slide, please? Actually, next slide after that. And now Mitch is going to talk a little bit more about kind of the plan going forward in terms of how to leverage data.
Thanks, Don and Kara. So as Don mentioned, that we work together every day. It's been every day since the past 5 years. And so today, what we hope to do is share our strategies on how we tackle even the simplest requests all the way up to the most complex litigation portfolios that we are handling. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how we collaborate across our teams and how that translates and how we collaborate with our in-house counsel stakeholders so that you can gain the insights and the inspirations of questions to ask and tools to potentially seek so that you are leveraging your outside counsels to achieve your goals. Next slide, please. So as Dawn has mentioned and Kara's talked about, these pain points are incredibly real and we're feeling them every single day, top down. There's just a sheer volume of information swirling around. You're getting emails between your teams, your internal stakeholders, your outside counsel. You're handling multiple projects at once, so there's lots of spinning plates. Everything is getting buried, and sometimes that information, when you do get to it, is already outdated, stale by the time you need it, and that creates a lot of frustration, both vertically and horizontally, and it's incredibly inefficient. So that's where project management can, help. I can count on the number of, I can't count the number of times how many projects where I've just been asked to jump in mid-flight, flying the plane as opposed to getting in on the ground level and being able to instill some process before things get out of hand. So many times there are no systems for tracking deadlines with these in-house clients. They just aren't tracking their charges or they aren't tracking their counseling advice. And so, deliverables become a guessing game. Who does something sit with? Where is it? What's the status of it? Or sometimes when you even have a process, it gets to the point where people just aren't following it because there's no one to sort of instill that rigor and make sure that, updates are getting processed, like Don said, and things like that. So data is everywhere. It's in the documents, it's in your emails, it's in spreadsheets, billing guidelines, the contracts, the 500 contracts that the Kara team executed last year. But if you don't know what is in those documents, how can you make proactive strategic decisions for your business? So next slide. So that's where LPM can come in. I'm so glad you asked what LPM is. And that is applying project management principles to the practice of legal work. What we're not saying is we're going to turn you all into a bunch of project managers. I like my job, I'd like to keep it, but we are going to tell you tips and tricks about how you can think like a project manager to inform your business day to day. So we know everybody's got to be more flexible, more nimble today, and project management principles should fit in with what you're doing. So, and just like that, the outside counsel should also complement the work that you're doing. It's a collaborative effort, and we want the attorneys like yourselves to all be focusing on the high value tasks that you are doing and the deliverables where your expertise matter most. But LPM in a nutshell and how it applies here is pretty simple. It's the right people at the right time doing the right tasks. So sometimes that means delegating down to an analyst to run some numbers down. Sometimes that means delegating up to a subject matter expert like Dawn. And using project management practices and principles, it helps you decide when those times are, who those resources are, and what those tasks are. And all of that is towards the goal of improving the process, making it more efficient, lowering costs, and mitigating risks, as Kara had mentioned. So Another piece that I'll leave you with here on the slide is essentially firms like Seyfarth. There are many, obviously, other firms that you are all using. We have our own tools, but they may not be the right tool. They might not fit for what you're doing. And so, we'll talk about things that are as simple as pen and paper, all the way complex up to software tools and then things that you can buy in the marketplace. And we're fortunate that we can build things in-house or we can buy something off the shelf. But the point is to remember that it has to align with your goals. And we're not saying go out and spend $100,000 on a piece of software that doesn't fit your practice group. Next slide, please. So I've said this, but what types of data are we talking about? It's the emails, it's the notifications, it's the new project request, it's your weekly or your monthly or your quarterly reporting, your metadata, your billing data, your invoices. It's everywhere, it's all the time. So, and as Kara mentioned, imagine you're tracking invoice data in one system, your HR in another, your matter updates are in another, but you're getting specific case updates in an email from your outside counsel. And none of this is integrated and organized, and you are left looking at multiple systems at the same time. And that is causing inefficiencies and sometimes causing you to be able to not make informed decisions, miss deadlines, have budget overruns. And so instead, we're talking about, some technology tools and some processes where like you'll have dashboards and a standardized cadence of reporting or consistent formatting, like Don might have mentioned, where you're asking your outside counsels to provide their updates in the exact same form so that you can just collate it into one single source of truth, centralize it, and be able to understand it, analyze it, and act. Next slide, please. So now that we've sort of identified the types of data and that we're all inundated with and the challenges that can create, the question becomes, how do we make sense of all of this? And this is where technology can come into place besides the processes and the principles. So part of project management principles, the right tool at the right time can turn some disparate piece of information, some unrelated set of systems, and turn that information aggregated and turn it into some actionable insights. And Dawn and I will talk about that in the slides to come. But all of this to say, the point of all of it is for the data to come together, for your outside counsel to help you interpret it so that you can be informed, so that you can improve your outcomes by allowing the systems to help communicate and collaborate better between outside counsel and in-house counsel. Next slide.
Next slide, Madeline.
One back.
There we go.
Yeah, so I'll kick it over back to Kara and just get your insights and thoughts on the technology solutions that you use to make your everyday and your team's day a little bit easier.
Yeah, I love technology solutions. I use them every single day. Right now, I'm really loving Monday.com. It's keeping me organized with task management, project management. I like that I can follow the history of everything that's happened in that task. And one of my favorite things to do is sort by the last time I made an update, because so much what I do is following up with people to see the status of where something is. Um, and it also gives me some really nice data about where in the world we're spending our time, what type of work we're doing a lot, so we can make some decisions about resources. We also work with our CLM system almost daily. My team does not do the commercial contracts, but we have integrated our director signature process into our CLM. So we found other ways to use it. And this allows internal and external stakeholders, including counsel, to submit documents that require our director signatures. And they can answer a couple questions. We're able to automate our approvals, and then our directors know, exactly what they're being asked to sign, why, who approved it, and it's all archived and saved automatically, which is fantastic. And we're using data from that system to start preparing for next year and thinking about when we're going to have high volume and how we can deal with some jurisdictions that still require wet signatures. In a current life, I was at a company that had a ticket managing system, and I absolutely loved that. Just from being able to get all of our requests in to being able to organize my day, from a productivity perspective, but also from a knowledge perspective. Everything that had been done by my predecessors was in these ticketing systems. I knew, anything I needed to search for, any experience I was having, someone probably had dealt with something similar before, and I could look that up and find out all of this information at my fingertips. So I really, really appreciated that as well. Um, that isn't to say, and Mitch, you bring this up, but not all systems are going to be the right system. You might not need a overly expensive option, and even the best systems may fail, right? I've seen billing systems that imploded during implementation. I've had overly developed tools that required we work with IT, and they just really weren't accessible to us as a legal team. They had so many other things that they were working on. So it really is important to think about what tools are going to work for your organization. How is your team structured? What are your current workflows? What's the culture of your legal team when it comes to technology and your company, and who your stakeholders are? And also, really importantly, what does their tech stack look like and their tech roadmaps look like? Um, Again, you may not need a significant billing tool if your finance team is about to go through a big change, or your accounts payable team, or if you have only a couple folks who are engaging with outside counsel. You might be able to use forms and Excel to streamline the data that you're getting and make it more usable, and have better data quality. A CLM is great if it integrates with Salesforce, but is your sales team at the point that their opportunities are structured in a way that they can meaningfully automate a contract? Um, does your company only work in email? Because then an email integration might be a must-have for any sort of technology that you bring on, because you're not going to get people to go to a form and fill it out. Another big one I'd say is, do you have a project or change management team that can help you? I know there are lots of companies that have that as an official function, and they can work through any sort of technology changes. But otherwise, you might want to cut your teeth on something smaller, less expensive than going through that process with a $200,000 system. So those small, low-hanging fruit are a great way to build momentum and trust as you're moving forward in your technology kind of life cycle.
Thanks, Kara. That makes a whole lot of sense. I know, legal isn't the most fast in terms of changing to new software. And I know there's lots of hiccups with generative AI. And I find myself, thinking, can I use Gen AI for a lot of things? But then I go, well, I can go into Excel and run a pivot table and do it much faster than it would take me to prompt it and sort it and turn it. So, yep. And so, talking about this, real life case study, this is a low tech, in terms of what we're speaking about, but this is an example where we just use Microsoft Excel. It's something that, most everybody has as a, Microsoft Office suites and is familiar to some degree, but it is an incredibly powerful tool, and one that, most in-house counsels have access to, and obviously, so this little anecdote is, I was working with a large multinational healthcare organization, and they ran this sort of common all staff survey in the last couple of years across their entire workforce, tens and tens of thousands of employees, to learn about how everybody thought leadership was, how their day-to-day was going, where they thought company culture was. And collecting that data isn't really the hard part. It's it's a survey goes out and the data is collected as and aggregated based on the responses. But the hard part is making sense of the raw data once it comes back. And so in this project, I asked for 2 years worth of data, so we could compare the current results to the previous year. And now I had two huge data sources of tens of thousands of rows and columns to look at and review to try to make sense of it. So the problem isn't here, as I've been speaking about, too much information. The problem here is that the fact that numbers alone don't tell you what is or is not working, what's broken, what needs attention. The fact that 50, 60, 70% of your employees answered yes to a particular question. Well, what does that mean for you for a compliance risk, or what does that mean for your company's strategic priorities? So next slide, please. So I apologize for this incredibly blurry image, but I just wanted you to get an appreciation for what the data looked like, and this is the screenshot of what it was that I had to blur. But the problem with the data, before we get into how we solved the problem, was that these couple of years worth of all staff survey data wasn't collected. What the questions weren't designed for the purposes of a retrospective look back and doing this analysis. So there was a lot of work that I had to do in order to make sense of it and get the raw data output to be able to be formatted in such a way that I could extract any sort of insights and then report that up to the partners who would then, be able to craft the story and the presentation to the client. So ultimately, we were able to get the data in such a form through, a lot of effort, and our in-house client was able to get benefit from it. But we were able to learn from this process that and it's happened on multiple cases with Don and I recently, where the data isn't intended to be used in the way that we need to use it. And so for future lessons learned, we talk about perhaps organizing it differently, collecting it differently, such that you can answer future questions like the ones that we're going to have to answer. So next slide, please. So that after doing the data analysis, I was able to create this heat map. And so we were able to organize the data to show hot button issues and help the client, help our in-house counsel draw some conclusions and make some determinations with the business about how to be proactive. They were able to use that heat map, take a screenshot of it, include it in presentations, leadership, and be proactive to address, areas of potential discontent and improve employee satisfaction to prevent potential risk issues. And I think that's where your outside counsel can really add value here. We're not just giving you legal advice, but we're helping you to interpret data to drive decisions that's going to improve your outcomes and goals. Next slide, please. The Microsoft Office is one of the tools and toolkits that help you communicate your cases and your projects effectively to all of your stakeholders. Most of us already use it. Another tool that I use on a regular basis that's like Monday.com is Smartsheet for basic document and spreadsheet management and dashboards. There are other specific project management tools that I use that sometimes we use on our projects, like project plans and staffing plans and process maps we'll talk about, that are used to help keep both the in-house counsel team and the outside counsel team aligned on responsibilities and timelines and who does what. And so all these tools are not specifically to be used by one side or the other. They are to be used collaboratively, because when both sides have access to the project plan or the dashboard, transparency increases. There's no hiding anything. Instant questions can be asked and handled. So all this to say, if you are currently only receiving weekly or monthly or quarterly updates from your outside counsel, ask instead to receive a weekly status update, if that works for you, or schedule a weekly status call for 30 minutes to get a case update. If paragraph after paragraph of updates isn't cutting it, ask for something different. Another tool that we use is Seyfarth Link, which is like a Microsoft SharePoint. And so it is dashboards and trackers and other visuals that are updated in real time by our team, so that, you know, if you have a question on the Smith case, you don't have to go and email Dawn at, 10:30 at night. You can just go look on your phone. The latest status was updated last week, and this is where we are in the case. And that is a great tool that if, somebody from your business org is asking why, you're asking for this sort of authorization for settlement or something like that, you can provide the information quickly and accurately. And I think Kara had mentioned it, it's not a one size fits all. Make sure that you are using the tools that are appropriate for your team, but also don't be afraid to ask for something that is interesting. Lots of outside counsels have access to various tools, like I've said, and so we want to use them. We want to make everything better. We are in a client service environment. We are here to serve you. So if there's something that is or is not working, it's best to just raise that. Next slide, please. So another example of technology implementation is with a former client of mine that was a chain restaurant entity. And so we were dealing with redeveloping the restaurant spaces. So with that comes lots of challenges about tracking which restaurants, where they are, and with that even there are different requirements from state to state, city to city, different laws that govern the agreements, permitting rules, landlord consents, regulatory signups, and all of this has to be tracked, because if you miss a deadline or anything, that creates unnecessary extra work, that creates extra costs, and potentially triggers legal risk. Next slide. So this was another one where I joined the project late, but this is somebody I'd worked with previously, so they sort of knew from past workings things that they should and should try. And so they were tracking it. They were tracking the requests coming in a spreadsheet on our document management system. So it was sitting on our side. Our case team, paralegals, case assistants had access to it. If the client had a request, they would email it in, somebody would upload it, the partner would then assign it to an associate to deal with. So the good thing is it was being tracked, balls were not getting dropped. The problem is that this was incredibly manual, and at the time there was no co-authoring mode as there is now in many documents in Microsoft. So it was one person at a time working in a document until they were done and they checked it in. And then, we were only sending it to the client on a weekly basis. So the client, if they had a one-off question, would have to reach out. They couldn't just rely on the spreadsheet being accurate and up to date, because work was getting done throughout the week. So the lesson learned here is, although we were doing it, this is incredibly crucial for transparency, that you are tracking all the requests, all the deadlines, and making sure nothing slips through the cracks for risk purposes. Next slide. So when I did join the project, I decided to, based on the conversations with both the in-house counsel and our team, to transfer what was in Microsoft Excel to Smartsheet, and basically recreate the restaurant tracker in Smartsheet. We got instant buy-in there because the client was already using Smartsheet on their side. So it was just a matter of getting buy-in, which was easy because the client was using it from our side, and then just training the team on a new tool that was fortunately very similar in use to Excel. So we took all of that, and the benefits of that was, now that the client had a link to the Smartsheet tracker, they could check it in real time on their phone. They didn't need to go and ask the relationship partner the status of a particular project. multiple people could be working in it at the same time without issue of checking out and overwriting data. We could set up email notifications so that when certain cells were filled in and rules were triggered, the next person in the chain of review would get it for either to do a title review or a QC check. So that was that. The other point, the other benefit to this is that Smartsheet had a form that I could build out. And so I built out a simple form that the client would then just populate every single time that they had a new request. And so that request would automatically feed in to the Smartsheet, and then the process would kick off and it would get assigned to an associate based on the location of the restaurant. So it was that sort of thing. So the win there was obviously client buy-in, ease of use for our team, and the fact that we had it, and it was centralized so that the client had access to it at all times. So that provided better data analysis. They could, I created dashboards and they could see in real time, the in-house team, how many projects were ongoing, what their statuses were at any time. And that information was used to communicate with us and help us prioritize or reprioritize review more efficiently and drive client success there. Next slide.
And Mitch, I love that you mentioned just before we go off that they already had Smartsheet. I think a conversation with IT can really help you understand what tools other groups within your company are already using. And it's a lot easier, again, to get that buy-in, to get that spend when it's a product that you have available. So it's a really good win right there.
So another tool that spans the gamut of low tech to high tech that is a project management tool, but I feel is one that once we talk about it, you can go run off to your next meeting and do it. But it's called process mapping, and process mapping is a planning tool that we at Seyfarth and my team in Lean Solutions use to visualize the workflow being done. What is important, as you'll see in the image, is things are as we think they are, fairly similar, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. How they actually are, which is terribly complex and inefficient, and how they should be, which is incredibly streamlined. So how do we get there? Next slide. We get there by not really doing anything particularly high tech to start with. This is a picture from our office from one of our team meetings. So on team meetings, have them this morning, we often will get together and discuss a new to us workflow. A few weeks ago, we mapped out our monthly accruals process that our billing team is starting to implement more widely across the firm. So we had people on our team that were involved in that, and we had others who had no involvement. And so it was a knowledge share about how that whole process worked. So we didn't use anything fancy. We literally used Post-it notes, Sharpies, and a window. And so we did that. You can do it during your next team meeting or your next in-house council meeting. But the goal of that is to get the process on paper so that you can review it, analyze it, and improve it. So next slide. So this is a snippet of a much larger ADA accommodations process map in its more final form. Don will go a bit into what that is in the next coming slides, but just talk about like why we process map. And as I said, it's a way to visualize the current state of the process, but also what the ideal future state looks like. It helps you to improve communication because you are talking about each step in the workflow in the process. It identifies inefficiencies, and through that you can streamline work to reduce costs, reduce risk, reduce touch points between in-house, outside counsel, or just like any process that you're doing. It's a very multifaceted tool. We use it to train new team members, use it to standardize process across different teams so that, you're all working from the same map. And Dawn will talk about experiences that she's had, doing that for multiple clients. So, the previous slides, we started with the sticky map. This is a more finalized, polished version of the process map that we used, a Microsoft product called Visio. But you can do this in PowerPoint, just drag a bunch of boxes and order them and put the tasks in there. We use another tool called Miro for when we do that remotely, and it allows us to drag and drop, sketch out the process as we go. But you're asking yourself, well, what should we do? What should it include when we're process mapping? And the answer is everything. So every task, every sub-process, every resource, whether that's your HR system, whether that's a person, whether that's a checklist, how long it takes to do the task, any sort of additional tools. The point here at this stage is to leave absolutely nothing out. So you want to see all the little hidden factories, all the inefficiencies that are going on. And when you do that, when you get everybody in the room to talk about it, it helps you to figure out, do you have the right people doing the right task at the right time? Are there too many people doing one task? Is the task going back and forth? Are there too many areas of waste that are happening? But sometimes there are tasks in there that you've got to keep just because you've got to meet some sort of regulatory requirement. It doesn't matter how inefficient it is, but you try to make the efficiencies gained around it. The one piece I will say is that when you get to this point, use the map. Don't just do the exercise and stick it in your metaphorical desk or your filing system. It doesn't, as for all these tools, it doesn't help you if you're not using them. So just another example of how this has played out in real world for me. There was a project that I was on. I was rolled off. But the team was sort of in transition. The Seyfarth team was sort of swapping associates out that had now become partners, and the in-house team had become had some turnover within their team and reorganizing itself. So I did a little pre-work based on my memory, my recollection of what the process was, and put it into a process map and used that when I was facilitating the discussion about how to go about the process that we were revisiting. And what that did, the little bit of pre-work that I did, what that did was, one, help me facilitate the process, but it also gave us a starting point and saved several hours worth of meeting time that we would have sat in there trying to figure out. So just remember that you can process map practically anything. You can process map, going on vacation. That's one of the examples that we do when I'm teaching this to law school students. But just remember that it can be anything. It can be operational, or it can be your project based. Next slide, please. I think Dawn's going to talk about some ADA.
Yeah, so thanks, Mitch. So we at Seyfarth, we process map absolutely everything. But one recent example where we helped clients with process mapping is around both ADA and religious accommodations. And actually the previous slide, the map that Mitch was showing, is an example from an ADA accommodations process map. Process mapping actually works really, really well in the ADA or religious accommodation space because it really is, as Mitch described, it's a planning tool where we see how something moves through the accommodation system. So the very first box will be, the employee somehow letting somebody at the company know that they have a need for an accommodation. And so we'll map that, they may bring that to a manager. That's one sort of sequence. They may bring that to HR directly, and that's another sequence. And what we have found, we recently did this with a group of most of the major Boston hospitals, for example, where they worked with us to put their current processes into MAP. And what they found is that in the discussions around building this MAP, they would have internal dialogue around like, well, wait a minute, is that piece actually handled by us or is that handled by a vendor? And they identified that one issue was that they found that sometimes leaves of absence were expiring and no one was alerted to the fact that it was expired. So, an employee might come to the end of their leave, nobody in HR is really following up, and therefore the person is kind of left in that status for far too long. And clients were actually seeing that more claims were being filed because balls were being dropped. And so by putting this sequence into a process map, they were able to identify, what is the current state of the process, and then in doing so, where could we see process improvements and how could we map those? So it's a perfect example of how your outside counsel can help you to look at existing systems within the company where there may be risk and issues, and use these kinds of tools, whether it's the simple post-it notes on a wall or on a window, all the way to actually mapping it using technology. Next slide, please. So we want to give some additional examples of how to use data-driven solutions, and hope that some of these might speak to you in terms of some of the issues that you may be having in your organization right now. Next slide. So this is actually a project that Mitch and I worked on together, where it actually probably describes multiple projects that we've worked on together, but large complex portfolios where a client has cases all over the United States, so multi-jurisdictional, some in state court, federal court, arbitration, a large case team and outside counsel because there are so many matters, with a project manager assisting, and then different in-house counsel across those different matters in different jurisdictions, and kind of different levels of engagement from the in-house team. So some people who might be sort of more of an oversight role, whereas others are managing the cases on a day-to-day basis. And so, how do you make a seamless, efficient process to manage that kind of matter? Next slide, please. And so what we have tried to do is to really turn data into action. And so that is about making sure that we're leveraging anything that happens, learnings from any particular case in one jurisdiction to optimize that across all of the matters in a portfolio, creating feedback loops that work between the in-house counsel and the outside counsel. And I think both Mitch and Kara have kind of alluded to this in different ways, but whatever works for that client, whether they want a weekly update, whether they want a certain kind of check-in call, and one thing that we really suggest is to templatize reporting between outside counsel so that it's not a laborious task to update and to consolidate for your own internal analysis and sharing purposes. Sometimes we use color coding in our updates, or highlighting, so that in-house counsel can read quickly through bullet points and identify what are the action items that might be color-coded in a different manner. And of course, using a project manager is a tremendous asset, saves so much time and money, and so that is often a fantastic tool. Next slide, please. Another example of how we have utilized data-driven solutions is a client that Mitch and I worked on relatively recently, where the client faced a very large, complex lawsuit with hundreds of plaintiffs, different types of claims, different damages profiles, different liability profiles. And of course, any litigation that size is expensive. And so the task was sort of, how do we even begin to think about whether we want to try these cases, whether we want to try to explore resolution of the cases, like how do we even think about all of the different complex data that is part of this litigation. And so we put all of that information into a PowerPoint that we could share with the client. And the next slide, please. This is, again, we had to anonymize this to sort of simplify it to share it, but This was an example of how we showed damages estimates across multiple different categories of plaintiffs, utilizing bar charts that were sort of easy to see visually and understand. Next slide, please. And then high end of damages estimates across multiple different kinds of plaintiffs. And these are just two screenshots that were relatively easy for us to share without any confidential information. But this was maybe a 30 slide deck that we were able to share to sort of help the client understand this is the big picture across all of these cases. These are the sort of liability and damages issues. And the client found it enormously helpful, also for their own internal stakeholders to be able to explain where the case was at and different approaches for next steps. Next slide, please. Many of our clients face this challenge where they have so many administrative charges in labor and employment space across the country. So at the EEOC or across state agencies. And those are different procedural stages, different types of claims, whether it's race, gender, retaliation, and it may be different people, both in-house and outside counsel, who are handling those charges. So we have developed, and the next slide shows a charge tracking tool that where we are tracking every charge across the nation. And not only can you drill down into the most, the most detail possible if you want, but you can also see big picture elements like you see here on this slide. So, how many charges are coming in each department or division of your company? How many are being filed in, which place around the country? And also what type of charges are you seeing? So if you see that, tons of the charges have to do with religious accommodation or, pregnancy, then maybe that's a training opportunity. Or maybe there's a particular division that's getting all the charges and that's a training opportunity. And so this has been an incredibly valuable tool for many of our clients. And like Mitch said, you can also, if you choose to do so, you can access this at, 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night, which we don't advise, but if you wanted to, you could. So it's a 24/7 tool. Next slide. And now Mitch is going to talk a little bit about budgeting.
Thanks, Dawn. I think we can all safely say that, one of the things that we're all conscious about is legal spend and how much it costs to engage with outside counsel. Is pretty heavily scrutinized by the business side, but it is part of our everyday. And so, on one of my cases with Dawn, the in-house client needed visibility into their legal spend across the portfolio of matters. And so we would obviously send them the monthly invoices from our finance team. And then I work with the case team to create robust budgets that track to that. And of course, they would get the regular weekly case status updates to see, okay, this is why the spend is the way the spend is, because the case is moving along in such a clip. But all that information in those 3 disparate ways together wasn't able to help the client understand why we were trending over budget on certain cases versus others. And if this case spend was outpacing what the case was actually worth, and should we start entertaining settlement to cap spend. So working with our technology team, and as you can see with Dawn, some of the tools that we have on SharePoint, on our Seyfarth Link SharePoint site, we were able to create a custom dashboard that talked to our billing system to show in real time the client every single night. It would refresh, what the matter amounts that we had budgeted were versus what the worked amount to that point had been, so that the client and our relationship partners, were being transparent with each other and could see in real time, what was happening. It was displayed, color coded like I tend to like to do, with stoplight, red, yellow, green, for a percent of the budget that was, over the top line. But that's, just another way to track legal spend so that you have insight into it, and so you can make decisions with your outside counsel and pivot and reprioritize case strategy much more proactively instead of being reactive when things are over budget and you've got a bill that to pay. And next slide. So using dashboards and reporting tools like that give you real-time visibility so that the risk is mitigated about going over budget and upsetting the business folks and getting some of those unrealistic expectations placed upon you. And it also is an opportunity to identify where work could be shifted to lower cost resources or even consider different or alternative fee arrangements. And so tracking the outcomes of these cases based on their budgets, is a little bit of a through line to show, how you are closing projects and matters and being efficient and using spend. So that's one of those ways that you can show your folks, your business folks inside how things are going and show that you are adding value and your outside counsel relationship is adding value to your team. So when the client can reduce the legal spend and get in front and make smarter decisions, that's better for everyone. And so just moving on to the next slide. Just want to ask Kara, about sort of the surprise bill and how transparency probably would have helped in an instance where you got a charge that you didn't know was coming.
Yeah, I mean the surprise bill is no fun. Mitch, I think you hit on a lot of ways that we can really manage it. Um, one thing I do like to do is make sure we're very clear on scope, and I like to start from the kitchen sink. I want to know every possible thing you think might be part of this, project or case or whatever it may be. And then we can get specific and take things off the table. But I find that I get a better idea of the true budget that way. But one thing that you did hit on was having that conversation in that relationship and being able to track where you are so that you can have those deliberate conversations of what should we do? What do we need to change? Have we learned enough? Do we need to change our strategy? Do we maybe legitimately need to increase our budget? But it's really important for that to be a deliberate conversation and not just based on what the spend has been. But I think it's really important that, with your counsel, they are forecasting where they think it's going to go based on how everything has been trending, so that you can make that decision and have that conversation as early as possible. And I also think that's where a preferred vendor relationship can be really helpful. If you're working with a preferred firm, they understand your business, they know your risk tolerance, they might even know what your approval process is for a budget. And so you can bypass a lot of work and spend just by, being with a firm that is trusted and has that good relationship with you. And it's the firms that embrace that collaborative approach that I find are really true partners. And frankly, they're the ones that rarely surprise me with a scary bill.
I love that. Okay, so we're coming up on time. I just wanted to hit 2 quick points. If we could go to the next slide. This is a solution for tracking counseling advice. Next slide, please. So, we have developed this system for if clients are calling and asking counseling questions, where we are actually recording the advice the same day that it's given. And so that allows you to check in at any time, on the platform to see what that advice is, but also to go back and, if you think 6 months ago, I know someone answered that question, but I can't remember what the answer is. This is a searchable database, and it can be easily found. Next slide. And also can just graphically represent, again, data around what kinds of counseling questions are coming in, where training might be appropriate, where there might be an unacceptable level of risk in the organization. Next slide. And then also just a matter of keeping up with the laws in many jurisdictions. Next slide. We've developed something called the Survey Center, which is accessible to any client. It's free and sort of 24/7. with many, many different kinds of questions around, for example, if you want to know what is the pay transparency law in a given state, you just click right on the state, and that is kept up to date by our team, so is always current. Next slide. We've run out of time, unfortunately, for questions. Next slide is the CLE code, which is SS2026. SS is in Seyfarth Shaw 2026. Next slide. And here is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out if we could tell you more about any of these topics. And thank you so much for being here with us today.